Welcome to the very last installment of the Department of Nove Live. This is the very last episode of the series, and we hope that you've been inspired by our series featuring many brilliant guests sharing their facets on the problem of modern security and how to make it successful. And at the very least, we hope that you're now imagining a better way to do security, or maybe you had some of your assumptions challenged, which is important too. So with that, I am Kelly Shortridge. I have been the co-host throughout our journey, and I am Senior Principal Product Technologist at Fastly.
I'm B. Hughes. I'm a Staff Security Engineer at PagerDuty.
And for this last edition of our series, we have Daniel here to talk to us about asset management. So Daniel, please introduce yourself briefly for the audience.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Daniel. Got about 20 years experience in security, doing all sorts of different things. Started off in system administration, did a lot of offensive security, did a lot of application security consulting, and am now leading a team at a financial services company.
Fantastic. So as a reminder to the audience, please throw all of your spicy takes, hot takes, everything else in between, or just regular comments, if you're so bold, into the chat section, which should be in the bottom right of your window. And if you have questions for us along the way, we'll be answering them afterwards. So put them in the Q&A box, which is under our videos. So to start it off, I know one of your takes is if you're not willing to pay one or more people to do asset management full time, you're not going to fail. You failed already, which I think is a fantastically bold statement. So the first question is, are companies without such roles really already pre-failed? And at what kind of scale or size of the organization should those roles be in place by?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a strong statement. I wouldn't say that they're pre-failed because, I mean, security is so young that I think everyone is failing. So I wouldn't say this is the reason people are failing. I would say failing at security is just common and pervasive. I would say that this is going to be, in my opinion, asset management is going to become like a baseline. It's going to become a thing that auditors and insurers and people who look for maturity in other aspects of business, right? People who look for stability and maturity and like something being solid, they're going to look for asset management as one of the primary markers of whether or not somebody has their stuff together. And as far as when you should hire a dedicated role for this, I'm not sure the exact size, but I would say over 100 people, maybe. It's time to start thinking about it. And it all depends on your stack. Like the more you are in the cloud, which is more common if you're starting now, I would say it's easier. So you should probably get started on this earlier.
Why do you feel asset management is so critical to, I guess, the modern security posture? And at what point can you know everything? Can you know everything?
No, it's a great question. It's a great point. There's no point in actually pursuing that, like trying to get to everything. First of all, it's changing all the time. It's changing faster than you could like pull the stats for it, right? So perfect is definitely not a thing to pursue here. What I would say is I think of security programs and really actually businesses as a series of questions. It's like, what are the most important things we're worried about? What are the scenarios that could happen that could close our doors tomorrow, right? And when it comes to security, it's things like, what do I have that's exposed to the internet? What do I have that has vulnerabilities? What do I have that has vulnerabilities and is exposed to the internet? What do I have that's horribly outdated? What do I have that's out of life, end of life, right? And if you don't know the answers to those questions, and Log4j is a great example of this, if you don't have the answers to those questions, it's actually really hard to respond to things because everything becomes a catastrophe. So if someone says, find me every instance of WordPress, find me every instance of a web app that uses Python, those all become one-off giant operations and everyone scrambles. Whereas if you think about asset management beforehand, you actually just run a query. because you already have the question asked and you already have answers ready. And I think that's the difference between having asset management and not.
How do you enrich your asset management with kind of, I don't want to say vulnerability information or risk information, but something on how do you prioritize, I guess, in that, or weight those things?
If you have access to AWS, there's tons of metadata there. So for example, you can query, is this a public IP address or not? Through a combination of a series of queries, you could say, show me everything that's a public IP address that's not behind a WAF, which the application behind it is a database but doesn't have encryption. So now it's a series of if-thens, but now you're arriving at an answer which is security context laden, right? The other thing you could do is you can have that content available via another method. God forbid it's manual, but whatever the method is to have context information around importance. So if every year or every 6 months or every month or whatever, the business rates the applications, the rating of that criticality can be assigned to this asset management system just as a tag. So now you could say, show me everything critical that's also on the internet. And it's also not using encryption or whatever kind of control.
This seems like an extension of, I guess, the more traditional, you install an agent on a thing, it reports back to either a rebadged Dell box or now some kind of something as a service. And then you get nice tables of this version of this software has these CVEs in it, the sky is falling, etc. How does it extend beyond that? Because we've been living with those as long as we've had HTML tables, and MySQL has been able to output to them, and that hasn't solved security. So how would you say that this differs over that approach that we all know and loathe?
So you mean just like pulling a list of vulnerabilities and kind of blasting it out to people?
Yeah, like I have tool vendors that I have met that I won't name that have like agent runs on my EC2 instances, reports all the packages that are on them. You look at that thing, it goes, here are all the packages, here are all the CVEs. We've had that for a while, and the situation there is still terrible. What does this bring to make that less terrible?
Yeah, I feel like it's largely a vulnerability management problem of like, how do you surface issues to the people who care and can actually make a difference? I think that comes down to like, what is the messaging there, and how do you control the flow and the volume of information that you give to people and make sure it's like the most important stuff. And one thing I think is super useful with vulnerability management is to figure out for any particular audience, like how much they can tolerate. Like, for example, this conversation here won't be 7 hours long because we know people can't handle 7 hours, right? So does it need to be 30 seconds or does it need to be 7 hours? And it's somewhere in between. And I think it's the same for vulnerability management. If you know you can only hold a developer's attention or an engineering's team attention for a short amount of time, maybe we give them their top 3 issues. So now you have the context from the metadata from asset management that says these are the most critical to the business, they're the most fragile, they have the highest rated CVSS vulnerabilities. So we're only going to tell them about these top 3. And then next month, once we built some trust, we'll tell them about the next 3. The actual list is 147, but we're not just going to dump that on them because they won't trust us. They won't be able to do it. They'll feel helpless and they'll just stop interacting with us.
So I think one assumption that's kind of baked in there is that you can identify who owns the asset, right? And I think that's a very tricky, like non-trivial thing. I think it would be fantastic if it was always in metadata, but it's not. And I think particularly to your point, when an incident happens, like if you don't know who to go talk to, who understands the system, that's a huge problem. So how do you tackle kind of the tying an asset to an owner problem?
That is, I have to tell you, these questions are just very, very insightful into all these problems. The way I've seen this be handled is you have to actually have a high level project dedicated to just this. And it's the same as asset management, where people will be like, seriously, you're going to spend my time finding owners? And it's like, seriously, you're going to spend my time doing asset management? And the answer is yes and yes. Because you can't have the vulnerability management conversation if you don't have an owner, to your point, Kelly. So the answer is you have to spend time gathering the information, and you just turn it into a flow, and it's got to be somewhat automated, as automated as possible, but it's got to be continuous, because that has to be a continuous write into the asset management system, so the tag of owner is always available. The other thing this lets you do is build a dashboard that shows a person the vulnerability context of their particular role. So if I run X engineering team, I could say, show me all vulnerabilities from me down, right? And if an IC developer logs in, they're just going to see the vulnerabilities that they have authority over, right? And if some, the CEO logs in, they can see the whole org. And you just can't do that if you don't have the right mappings and tags and ownership data that you're talking about.
How does, like, that is a problem that many organizations face, I think, is a polite way of phrasing that. And I have definitely experienced things that are not owned by anyone, hopefully in either sense of the word owned, but let's talk from a business who is responsible from this code owned. And that sounds like an organizational issue as opposed to something you can just map. So this must have to have buy-in from a lot of people.
Absolutely. I mean, very similar to the previous point. It's like you do need buy-in, and the way that I've seen companies be successful with this is to essentially create a risk register and to list on the risk register this application, which, if it fails, is going to cause a major incident for us, or a security problem, or whatever, has no owner, and just put it on the list. Maybe it's number 5, maybe it's number 2, maybe it's number 1. But it's on a list that everyone has to review and take seriously. And then this all hinges on, is anyone actually listening? Is anyone actually looking at the risk register? If you have a risk register meeting, does anyone show up? Nobody shows up. You're in bad shape.
So how have you gotten buy-in to, how do you entice people to show up? Like, what are kind of the incentive levers you can pull?
I don't know. I feel like with you two being in this business, you should have a metric for time to log4j, like how far into the conversation does log4j come up. But it is a really good example of if everyone in the org gets hit by log4j and everyone feels pain from it, and you say, hey, that exercise that we took 4 days, 24/7, 4 days to find all of our instances, our colleagues over here had this other tool, or they built their own tool or whatever. They ran a query, they had the answer in 30 seconds. The difference between 30 seconds and 4 24/7 days is massive. And you just show the value of like how it would alleviate their pain in the future. You got to make it real to them. In my mind, changing someone's mind comes down to emotion rather than logic. And it's like, if they don't feel it, they don't believe it, and they can't be swayed by evidence. It's like they have to feel that pain. So unfortunately, the hope is that you have enough people on that call, that risk register call, who have felt pain over their 20 years, right? Or recently, over the last few days, because of something like log4j. And they're willing to put something in place to avoid that happening in the future.
This seems a challenging thing to do some of. Like, we have a full asset management of half the organization is not a compelling story.
Yeah.
It kind of feels all or nothing in that regard. Or not quite all, but like most or nothing.
Every time.
Yeah, exactly. So like we have all of our Red Hat boxes in asset management. We have none of our Ubuntu boxes in asset management. Like, cool. So we just put a message up to all the hackers to only compromise certain boxes
Right.
and then they pinky swear that, and we go from there. So how can do you think you can roll this out gradually or retrofit it into an organization, or is it you have to have this in the very roots of say even a company and an engineering org to be really successful with this?
Yeah, I think you can retrofit, but you've got to get the people at the top have to believe. They've got to be bought in. So I almost feel like some part of this is you got to do a litmus test of like, does anyone actually believe in this before you just smash yourself into the wall at full speed? And for a lot of the points that you've both brought up, like there are situations where people just don't care, and you should know that they don't care, and you should work on something else, right? But where you can get traction with asset management, I think it is an underpinning for so much other stuff. And I actually think I have an unpopular opinion that insurance is actually going to drive a lot of security in the future, cyber insurance. And
I mean,
I
it has
think,
been.
yeah, it is starting to, absolutely. And I think what they're likely to do is look for signals that indicate how much a customer should pay. And I think one of the strongest signals for them is going to be, do you have owners for things? Can you tell me a list of everything that's facing the internet? Oh, you can't? Oh, you don't have owners for things? Well, you're going to pay a lot because the chances of you getting compromised are much higher than for people who actually know the answers to these questions.
Hopefully after
Yeah.
this has been a fantastic dive into asset management, and hopefully anyone in the audience won't be ignoring the topic anymore. We're very thankful to have you, Daniel, on for the last part of the series. And again, for the audience, if you have any questions that are absolutely burning a hole through your digital pockets, please put them into the Q&A section below the videos, and we will be answering them shortly.